Hello upgraders and welcome to another episode of the Upgraded Ape Show. On today's show we have Helen Irlen, who is the founder of the Irlen Institute. We've had Helen on the show before, but today we're going to concentrate on something that I see and hear a lot of, and that is people with children talking about ADD and ADHD symptoms. A quick intro today, as Helen is an absolute fountain of knowledge, and I just want to dive straight into the show because you're going to learn an absolute ton from it. All the links and the books that I mentioned are available at radio.upgradedape.com. And without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Upgraded Ape Show, your daily dose of brain upgrades to help you kick life's ass. And here's your host, Will Barron.
Hi, Helen, and welcome to the Upgraded Ape Show.
Hi, Will. Nice to be here.
Today we want to talk about ADHD and ADHD. ADD and ADHD. I always get these confused. In fact, that's the first question I'll ask you, because we're going to talk about how this relates to Irlen syndrome. What are the difference between the two? Is it just a name, or are they technically different?
There is a big difference between the two. The ADHD implies that there is hyperactivity in addition to distractibility and attention problems, where ADD children do not have hyperactivity, and they're harder to diagnose and pick up, but they have just the inattentive behavior.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I did not know that at all. Well, let's look at how that relates to Irlen syndrome. And can you just give us a quick overview of what Irlen syndrome is and, how you are so involved and wrapped up in it all?
Yeah. When we're talking about Irlen syndrome, we're talking about a perceptual processing problem where the brain has difficulty processing visual input that's coming into them all the time, because if your eyes are open, your brain has to process visual information. And for some individuals, certain of those light frequencies are coming in the wrong timing, and the brain is struggling to process it, and it creates an environment under fluorescent lighting, or when reading or copying or doing any kind of visual activity that's almost like an optical illusion. And so you don't see things quite the way they're supposed to be, and it doesn't feel like it should feel. Instead, you get lots of symptoms or some symptoms of discomfort, and all of these symptoms can vary depending on the individual. And that's just a kind of quick summary. It says if your eyes are opened, you're taking in light, and then there's a chance that you may have Irlen syndrome, and you're working harder than you need to in order to perform and function in life.
And would you know that you have Irlen syndrome, or can it be on a range from subtle to severe?
Well, the range varies. I mean, first of all, not everyone has it, and if you do, can range from slight to moderate to severe. And does it people know? Most people don't know because it's something we don't talk about. Most people are not aware if they have this kind of sensitivity and if it's affecting them. You're so used to working to perform, to achieve, that you don't stop and sit back and analyze what's going on, nor are you aware of what it's like for anybody else. You can't tap the next person's shoulder and go, hey, how come you're doing it faster than me? It just doesn't work like that.
So how many people have, what kind of percentage of the population are we talking about that may be affected by it?
We're talking about 12 to 14% of the population.
Okay, and it's a massive amount, that, isn't it?
It's pretty large for a concept and a syndrome that nobody is talking about, and we're not educating and we're not screening for it in the school systems. I also want to point out, since we're talking about ADD and ADHD today, that about a third of those who are being labeled as ADD, ADHD are actually mislabeled, and it's inaccurate, and they actually have Irlen syndrome. So that's one of the reasons, Will, you and I decided to do this podcast, is to get this information out for that population.
And just to give that a bit more emphasis, that means that there's a third of children on crazy drugs that don't need to be on crazy neurochemical changing drugs.
Yeah, it's not the best way to go. And for many of them, they have negative reactions. It doesn't help at all, or it actually makes the behavior worse. And I have to tell you, it's become the flavor of the month to, well, here in the US, and I shouldn't state that worldwide, but in the US, it's the flavor of the month. And teachers kind of feel like, oh, that little boy over there, he's not sitting still as I want him to. And they push the parent and say, you must medicate, you must have that
Really?
child. Yeah, it's pretty much of an epidemic in this country. And all the statistics are saying worldwide that the number of children being identified has increased significantly in the last 10 years, and the number of children on medication has increased significantly. And the drug companies are looking to get approval to start medicating children for ADD, ADHD as young as 3 years of age. That's frightening.
How can you know a child of 3 has some kind of attention issue, though?
Uh,
Like that seems bizarre to me.
Uh, to me too. Absolutely. I would think it was pretty normal behavior for little boys and even
Yeah,
some
for
little
sure. Well,
girls.
you want to be encouraging them to be inquisitive and running around and not being able to focus on the TV because you've got stuff to do is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think we have to say to parents, don't be pressured by the authority figures, whether it's teachers, school systems, or medical doctors to medicate. Have a good sense of who your child is, and don't ignore your knowledge base and intuition because a lot of times it's a lot better than the professionals who really don't know your child. And I want to give one caveat to that, and that is the fact that if somebody says your child has ADD or ADHD, watch your child doing activities that they like to do. And if they have no problem attending and concentrating, guess what? They don't have ADD or ADHD. It shouldn't only occur in the classroom situation. It shouldn't only occur when somebody has to read or do academic tasks. If you have the problem, you have it. And it doesn't matter whether you're eating dinner or playing a game, you should be seeing the same behavior. And I hope that people hold on to that concept.
Yeah, you're right, and that's an amazing point. If a child, or and we'll come on to adults shortly, but if they're bored, they're not going to want to focus and concentrate, and that there's a lot of different ways that they could be taught, and there's many variables other than they're not sitting and listening. So there's an issue.
Yep. And I think before we get into Erlen, I want to make it clear that there are a number of other issues that can mimic ADD, ADHD, including Erlen syndrome. And just like headaches, where you can have 9 different triggers for a headache, you don't want to just look at one. You want to be able to assess all of them and make sure you're covering all the areas that can give you a headache. Same thing with ADD and ADHD. Quickly mention 3 just to show that
Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to just only push Erlen. I think we need to be as educated and as aware as possible. Toxicity from mold toxicity and other toxicities can create behavioral issues that can mimic ADD or ADHD. Think about food and food sensitivities. What you eat or drink can create hyperactivity, inability to sit still and concentrate. Many people react that way to food dyes, to gluten, to wheat, to dairy, to sugar, to a whole array of things that we eat and drink. By the way, that's hereditary. I think that can be a hereditary problem. So look at family issues. And the final one that I want to mention is what I call eating patterns, how frequently one needs to eat, because you have individuals who, when they are hungry, you start to see the fact that they have a harder time concentrating, paying attention. They don't feel as good as they do. And then once they eat something, they become more alert, more able to attend. This is again another hereditary issue. And it
And is
really,
that a psychological thing or is that a
no,
physical?
it's actual, physical. And it runs in families. And it really differs. There are people who can go and eat 3 meals a day, and then there are individuals who need to eat every hour and a half to 2.5 hours. And if they don't, there's a real change in behavior or how they feel that can affect their attention concentration and mimic again ADD, ADHD. And those are just three areas, and there are others as well. So to jump on the bandwagon and to immediate medicate may not be what you want to do first. You may want to look at a whole bunch of other areas, including Erlin.
And is everything you just mentioned applicable to both adults as well as children?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Makes no difference. Everything I'm saying applies to both children and adults.
Because I know I get a lot of our audience and the customers of the store, they're looking for ways to be able to focus themselves. And I say to a lot of them, like, if you're doing work which you don't care about, a lot of it comes down to with the adults. If you've got a job that you really just don't like, you're going to find it very, very hard to sit there for 2 or 3 hours and do spreadsheets for a boss that you hate and all this. They would sacrifice their health and go down the lines of taking some kind of like Adderall or medicinal or some kind of drug to force themselves through it. And without going too deep, I guess, into that kind of world and that side of things, there's other answers and there's other questions that need to be asked if you're an adult and you're putting yourself in those predicaments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You bring up an interesting point. That interest and general capability plays into it as well. Um, I can read a book forever, but give me math problems, and that's not going to be my forte.
Well, can you tell us a bit more about Irlen syndrome then and how that all ties it together? And can we go a bit more in depth into what light sensitivity actually is?
Okay. I first want to create an awareness. There are a lot of people out there who are aware that sunlight will trigger physical symptoms or discomfort, and they wear sunglasses outside, or that glare bothers them. What they're not aware of is that there is really a one-on-one correlation. If you're bothered by sunlight, typically the same discomfort and physical symptoms that are created in sunlight, bright sunlight, are also happening, but it's not an immediate trigger, so you're less aware of the correlation under bright lights, fluorescent lighting, glare, reading, doing visually intensive activities. So take the child who's in a classroom situation where they're under fluorescent lighting, they have to do tasks for longer and longer periods as they get older and go up in grades. They're working off of bright, high gloss white paper. They're looking at white boards, and trying to do things now on the computer. And on the computer or iPads, you're staring into a fluorescent light, and not realizing that it's creating the exact same symptoms as if they were outside having to stay and look at the sun in bright sunlight. And there's not that awareness, and we don't make that one-on-one association. We know we need to protect ourselves in sunlight, but we don't realize how we can remove those symptoms easily once you're aware of them. Let me tie it a little into ADD, ADHD. Say you're a child or an adult and you have Irlen syndrome and you're sitting in a classroom or in the office under fluorescent lighting. And without realizing it, your eyes may be bothering you. You may feel tension in your head, and you start to feel tired or sleepy. And you blame it on lots of things, but you don't realize that it may be the fluorescent lighting. I can't tell you how many individuals, adults especially, who say to me, I come home so tired from work. It's got to be work. And I'm saying, no, looking at your profile, it's got to be the fluorescent lighting. But the child's in class and he's getting tired and puts his head down. He daydreams. What happens? He immediately gets labeled as inattentive and having ADD, right? And that's
Mhm.
not what's going on. Um, you have lots of children and adults who, when you have Irlen syndrome, when you put black print on a white background, that white paper is as bright, again, as staring into a fluorescent light or being outside in the bright sun. And that brightness, again, creates headaches or nauseous or dizziness or tiredness or sleepiness or fatigue or just their eyes hurt and bother them and they can't keep looking at the page. And then add to it that often the print doesn't stay stable. It goes in and out of focus. It runs off the page. It goes seesawing around. There's just a whole bunch of distortions that you're not aware of necessarily happening on the page. Well, what do? And the longer you do it, the worse it gets, the brighter it gets, the worse the distortions get. So you stop and you look up and you look away and you feel fidgety and you get frustrated and you build breaks in. And again, to the classroom teacher, or even the parent, they're concerned because the child can't pay attention, cannot attend, is fidgeting, is wiggling, is moving all over the place. And there you go again with a label of ADD, ADHD. And so Irlen can really mimic exactly the same symptoms that occur in the classroom, in the workplace, under fluorescent lighting, which then somebody will say, well, for your child to function in class, you need to medicate them. For the individual in college to say, well, to stay focused so I can focus and study and do better on tests, I'm going to self-medicate, right?
Mhm.
Using Ritalin or something like that. Um, and we need to pay attention to, and I'll ask the questions. And so your audience can kind of self-test themselves, although we do have further questions on the Irlen website, which is irlen.com. Are you light sensitive? Does sunlight bother you? How does it feel? Pay attention. How do you start to feel under bright lights? Do you prefer to be in dim lighting? Does your child seem to prefer to read in dim lighting and you're always going in and turning on the lights and feeling and saying, you have to read in bright lights, right? By the way, that's a myth. Brighter is not better, and you won't hurt your eyes if you read in dim lighting. And especially for those who have Irlen, many prefer bright lights. There are some who prefer more lighting. But if you don't have Irlen, it doesn't matter whether you read in bright lights or dim lighting.
So let's look at some of those in a bit more detail then. The variables are bright light, dim light, a fluorescent light, natural light. Are
Indirect
there any
natural light.
other are there any other variables that you can test and experiment with to see if they're better for you?
Well, let's start with just the lighting, okay? And that's
Okay.
a very good one, is to see the difference for yourself with a child and how you function, how you perform, how you can attend when you're under bright fluorescent lighting. Pay attention to that versus dim lighting, indirect natural lighting, and maybe even dim indirect natural lighting. Those are key components.
And is this something you could do? Could you just go throughout 3 rooms in your house, read a book in each, and then see if there's a difference between each one, or does it take hours for the effects to like appear, or is it again because there's a sliding scale? Is it difficult to kind of do more to do a test back to back like that?
You can do it back to back, depending how severe you are, how quickly you'll be able to tell. So I say spend about 20 minutes in each room, or do it one night in one room or one day after school in one room and do it for 20 minutes to an hour. And the next day, change the lighting and compare. And you can do this a number of times, and you should get the same reaction. If this is not causing your problems with attention and performance, you wouldn't see a difference. It wouldn't matter whether you're in bright lights, dim lighting, fluorescent lighting. There wouldn't be a difference at all. But if you have this, you're going to definitely see and feel a difference. The other issue you need to look at is the concept of high contrast. Because white paper in itself can be as bright to the brain as sunlight, and it will just get brighter and brighter for each word and each line you're reading. And that's what's triggering, again, the discomfort and the distortions which contribute to the inattention and potentially hyperactive behavior for some. And here you can try reading on different colored paper. And see if that makes a difference. What we did to simulate that is we created the ability on the website to change the color of the background. So you can try reading on different colored backgrounds. And again, to see if one is calmer, more comfortable, your discomfort symptoms are less. And again, it will create an awareness between, oh, this feels good and this doesn't feel good. And unless you have a comparison, you don't know what good is supposed to be. So if you've lived your whole life reading with a slight, every time you read, there's a slight headache, you just baseline that as normal. And until you can compare it and go, oh, really? Gee, I don't feel that same tension and pressure on my eyes or my head. You don't even realize that that's the way it's supposed to be.
So what I'm intrigued there, Helen, just to go a bit more into the science behind it. If you've got a white piece of paper, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I may be wrong, but light is hitting it and it's white because all the frequencies of light are coming back at you and hitting your retina. Mm-hmm. So when you've got a different color, it's that color because it's the atoms themselves are absorbing that color. And so that's why you see that color when you look at it. Is light sensitivity that you've got, and fluorescent light would emphasize this, that you've got all these colors of light coming back and hitting you all at once? Or are people sensitive to specific frequencies?
Yeah, people are sensitive to specific frequencies, and that's the science of what we do, is figure out for each individual which of those colors or frequencies they're sensitive to, and only filter those frequencies. And for each one we need to filter, we have to determine exactly how much we need to filter it. It's very individualized and very customized for each person's brain, because we all have our own unique brains that are different from everybody else's.
And why is it, if you can explain this, like, and again, the science of it, why is it that a specific frequency can cause so many issues?
That's a great question, Willa, and I will tell you, as a scientist, researcher, and educator, I'm not sure I can answer that question yet. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because that gets into the whole concept of how we process visual information, and it really is very complex, and it occurs at so many different levels. There's a number of theories. One is we do have, in the lateral genicular bodies, once we get into the cellular level, we have something called magno and parva cells. And some of the cells receive the signal, and then the other cell has to shut it down. And then so the magno cells, parva cells receive the signal, and the magno cells shut it down. And that allows it to receive the next signal. What's happening is what some people are postulating is the fact they're not working right. So instead of receiving a signal and then being calm and shutting it down and being able to receive a next signal, the signal comes in as like a light bulb. And so the cell is just, immediately cannot process it. And it takes a while, just like when you have a flash, it just like stuns you, and then it takes a while for things to calm down and for you to start processing. Well, by the time the cell is now ready to process the information, next piece of information coming in, it's not ready when the next signal comes in. There's a constant overlap of signals going on.
That's fascinating. So it is literally a signal chain that isn't working as it should.
Right. Absolutely.
It's amazing stuff. It's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, and you can inherit it. So it's fun for children, as I always say, when they blame themselves because they try hard, and all we say to the child is just try harder, pay attention, work at it. And what they don't realize is the harder they try, the more they're working at it, the
Hmm.
worse it gets, and the less capable they are of doing it. Um, and so it's fun for me to say to the child, guess what? This is not your fault. You get to blame either your mom or your dad. But mom and dad, you get to blame either your mom or your dad. Um, we're also finding out that there are other factors rather than just hereditary that can contribute and cause this condition, such as head injuries, um, whether they're concussions or TBIs, documented or undocumented. Sort of certain autoimmune conditions and certain medical conditions make you more light sensitive. And we're becoming much more aware of the impact that certain sports can have when you have concussions, even one bad concussion. It doesn't even have to be a repeated concussion.
Well, Helen, I want to come back to at the end of the show what we need to do to both raise awareness and what listeners can do to learn more about it, you and the Irlen organization. But first, can we do a couple of quick fire questions just to learn a little bit more about yourself?
Oh, about me. All right, let's try.
Yeah? So, first one, what is something that you're grateful for today?
You know, what am I grateful for? I'm grateful for my family and my grandchildren who are my legacy and I love dearly, and my husband, my daughter, and my son. So, yeah, I'm grateful to have a wonderful, loving family and to have been married, to be married for 46 years now.
Great. If you could recommend one book to the Upgraded Ape audience, other than your own, which we'll come on to, what would it be?
I'd recommend Dan Amen's books, especially Change Your Life, Change Your Brain.
Amazing. That's not something I've come across before. I'll have to check that out myself.
Yeah.
What is one piece of music or a song that you really can't stand?
You know, that's such a hard question. Can we skip that one? Because I don't really think I have an answer to that.
There must be something that just it comes on the radio or on TV and you just go, oh, not again.
I don't know, Sherry Sherry or something like that. I have a tendency to listen to music from the 70s and 80s, and they're much
Okay.
more softer music.
Okay, next one. Final question for these quick fire questions then. And what is your most impactful productivity hack? Because you're obviously a very busy lady. What's the one thing that you have done or can do that really helps with your productivity?
The one thing you can do for individuals to help with their productivity,
Uh-huh.
well, obviously, I'm going to say to be aware in terms of Erlen, because that does affect your attention and your productivity, and without realizing you're paying a price. You're doing it slower than you need to be doing, you're working harder than you need to be doing, and you're not being as productive as you need to. And we're seeing that time and time again with people coming in and going, I just had no idea that it could be so easy and that I don't need to expend this energy. And I didn't even know that I was working as hard as I was working. So Erlen has a major impact in terms of increasing productivity and decreasing effort and stress. And we never even mention stress because if lighting is a chronic stressor, it affects the immune system, and that's your health and well-being. And for me, health and well-being is a critical issue, and that we need to take care of ourselves and protect ourselves so that we are healthy.
Good stuff. Well, Helen, just as before we wrap things up now, I know you've just had a busy week. We've just been Erlen Awareness Week. What can we do and what can the Upgraded Ape audience do to help spread the awareness of Erlen syndrome?
That's wonderful, Will. Thanks for asking the question. Talking about it, blogging about it, tweeting about it, and letting people know that there's something out there that they need to be aware of, and then directing them to Erlen.com for more information, posting some of our quick self-tests. And the other thing is to join the Erlen community on Facebook. So we have Erlen Institute on Facebook, and that's a community of parents and adults who have Irlen syndrome who talk about it, talk about how it's changed their lives, how it's affected them or their children. So there are two things to do. Join us on Facebook, Irlen Institute, spread the word, talk to other people, and start asking questions, and you'll be surprised. Nobody's going to come up to you and go, I don't like to read, or I avoid reading, or I get a headache with reading, or reading makes me sleepy. These are the things that we just don't talk about. But once you start sharing and educating, you'll change people's lives. And so I would say join me in changing lives and saving lives.
Amazing stuff. Well, Helen, I just want to say thank you again for your time today. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll post all the links that you just mentioned, and we'll see what we can do to help as well.
Thank you, Will. I really thank you.